25 household skills the modern world threw away, and one community that never did. While everyone else was replacing everything with something you buy in a store, the Mennonites just kept doing what worked. No electricity in half these homes, no credit cards, no running to the pharmacy for every little thing. And these families stayed fed, warm, clothed, and out of debt using tricks their grandparents used and their grandchildren still use today. These are 25 forgotten Mennonite household hacks that poor families leaned on, simple things that work better than half the products on the shelf right now. None of this is a relic somebody had to dig up. Drive out past the last paved road in Lancaster County or Holmes County today, and you'll find these skills still in daily use, in kitchens and wash houses and root cellars that never once needed the power grid. The rest of us called it progress when we let them go. They just kept going. So here's what they know that the rest of us forgot. Number one, soap made from wood ash and kitchen fat. Long before the grocery store sold a whole shelf of plastic bottles, a Mennonite family made its own soap in a big iron kettle out in the yard, usually in the fall after butchering. All year they saved their fat, the bacon grease, the beef tallow, the trimmings off the hog, everything into a crock in the cool of the cellar. The other half of the recipe came from the wood stove itself. They packed hardwood ashes into a barrel, poured rainwater through it slow, and caught the dark liquid dripping out the bottom. That liquid was lye, strong enough to burn your skin, and it turned the saved fat into hard, honest soap. One kettle boiling over an open fire could make enough bars to wash a whole family's clothes, dishes, and hands for a year. It cost them almost nothing but a Saturday and some patience. And there was no perfume, no dye, nothing a baby could react to. Plenty of folks with sensitive skin are paying good money for that exact same lye soap at farm markets right now. Number two, root cellar that fed them all winter. There were no big humming refrigerators in these homes and no freezer aisle at a store 20 miles away. What they had instead was a hole in the ground, done right. A proper root cellar was dug into a hillside or under the house, lined with stone, cool and damp and dark all year. Come harvest, they filled it. Potatoes and carrots buried in boxes of sand, cabbages hung by their roots, apples laid out so no two touched, crocks of sauerkraut and pickled beans down along the wall. The steady cool kept everything from freezing in January and from sprouting in March. A family could walk down those cellar steps in the dead of winter and come back up with supper, months after the garden had died back under the snow. Whole communities ate straight through to spring on what one good cellar held. And the power bill for all of it was a flat zero because a hole in the ground never once needed to be plugged in. Number three, rendering lard and saving every drop of drippings. When a Mennonite family butchered a hog, nothing walked away wasted, least of all the fat. They cut it into cubes and rendered it down slow in a big pot on the wood cook stove until it turned to clear, clean lard, then poured it into crocks and stone jars that kept for a year in the cellar. That lard was the butter, the shortening, and the frying oil all in one. It made the flakiest pie crust you ever put in your mouth, fried the eggs, greased the bread pans, and browned the potatoes. Every time they cooked bacon or sausage, the drippings went into a can kept right by the stove, saved for the next skillet of cornbread or a pan of gravy. The crispy bits left in the pot after rendering, the cracklings, got salted and eaten by the handful or stirred into the cornbread, and any lard that finally went too old for the kitchen went straight into the next batch of soap. Store shelves are full of oils in plastic jugs now, and folks pay a premium for a little tub of leaf lard at the butcher counter. These families made theirs for the cost of the firewood, and it lasted them clear to the next butchering. Number four, canning the whole harvest in glass jars. Walk into a Mennonite cellar in September, and you'll see a wall of glass, hundreds of mason jars catching the light. Green beans, tomatoes, peaches, sweet corn, chicken, beef, whole quarts of vegetable soup, and all put up by hand in the heat of summer so the family could eat like it was August in the middle of February. The women worked in teams around a steaming water bath canner and a pressure canner on the stove, filling jars, wiping rims, listening for that little ping as each lid sealed itself tight. A garden that came in all at once got locked into those jars and stretched across the whole year. Nothing rotted in a bin, nothing got thrown to the hogs that a family could have eaten. A cellar full of jars like that is money in the bank you can eat, and it costs a few cents a jar plus the work of one hot afternoon. People are rediscovering canning today and calling it a movement, but in these communities it never went away in the first place, because a full cellar was simply how you got a family through to spring. Number 5. Turning apple scraps into vinegar. After a long day of putting up applesauce and apple butter, most kitchens are left with a big bowl of peels and cores. In a Mennonite kitchen, those scraps didn't hit the compost yet. They went into a crock with a little water and sugar, covered with a cloth, and set in a warm corner to work. Over a few weeks, the wild yeast in the air turned it to hard cider, and then to apple cider vinegar, with a cloudy little disc called the mother forming on top to do the job again for the next batch. That homemade vinegar cleaned the windows, cut the grease on the counters, rinsed the hair soft, settled an upset stomach, and went into the pickle crocks and the salad dressing. One bowl of scraps most people toss straight in the trash gave them a jug of something the rest of us buy over and over. And the batches that came out too weak or too sharp for the kitchen still had work left in them, killing the weeds coming up through the cracks of the walk and keeping the hen's watering pan clean. Number 6, sewing clothes out of feed sacks. Back when flour, sugar, and chicken feed came in big printed cotton sacks, the mills figured out something clever. Farm women were already using the empty sacks for fabric, so the company started printing them in cheerful flowers and calico patterns on purpose. And even matched the prints across sacks so a woman could buy 3 or 4 of the same feed and get enough matching cloth for a dress. In a Mennonite home, an empty feed sack was never trash. It became a girl's Sunday dress, a boy's shirt, an apron, a pillowcase, a set of dish towels. Mothers washed the printing off the plain ones and bleached them white for diapers and sheets. A family clothed half its children off the same sacks that brought home the livestock feed. The material was sturdy cotton, often better than what you'd pay for new, and it cost them nothing beyond the feed they had to buy anyway. Even the heavy string that stitched the sack shut got wound into a ball and saved, good for tying up tomato plants, mending a bit of fence, or 100 other small jobs around the place. Number 7, the wood cook stove that did 5 jobs at once. In a plain kitchen, the big cast iron cook stove was the hardest working thing in the house. It baked the bread and simmered the soup, sure. But it also heated the whole downstairs in winter, dried the wet mittens and boots on a rack above it, and warmed the flat irons for pressing clothes, and kept a big kettle of water hot all day for dishes and washing and baths. A woman learned to read that stove like a clock, moving her pots to the hot spots and the cool spots with no dial and no number to go by. One armload of firewood was doing the work that a modern house splits across an oven, a furnace, and a water heater, a clothes dryer, and a space heater, every one of them running off a meter. The stove asked for nothing but wood they cut themselves and the skill to run it. Number 8, bread that never once went to waste. A Mennonite kitchen ran on homemade bread, often a week's worth baked at a time, and not a crumb of it got thrown out. Fresh, it was supper with butter and apple butter. A day old, it soaked up the gravy. Going hard, it got cubed and dried into the stuffing for the Sunday chicken, or torn up for a bread pudding sweetened with a little molasses. The very last dry heels got run through a grinder into breadcrumbs for coating the meat and topping the casseroles. Even the sourdough started as a way to raise bread with no store yeast at all, a little crock of living starter passed down and shared between neighbors like a family heirloom. A single batch of bread fed a family in 5 or 6 different shapes before it was ever gone. Waste a loaf in a home like that, and someone would gently remind you the Lord didn't grow that wheat so you could feed it to the pigs. Number 9, curing meat in the smokehouse. With no freezer to hold a whole hog, a Mennonite family preserved its meat the old way, with salt, smoke, and thyme. After butchering, the hams and the bacon and the shoulders got packed in salt or a salt brine for weeks to draw the moisture out, then hung in the little smokehouse out back over a low, slow hickory or applewood fire. Days of cool smoke turned fresh pork into country ham and bacon that could hang in the cellar for a year without ever going bad. The salt and the smoke did the whole job that refrigeration does now, and they did it with more flavor. A slice of that salt-cured country ham has a depth to it that no wet, pink, store-wrapped ham can touch. Families that still cure this way will tell you the smokehouse is the tastiest appliance they own, and it runs on scrap wood. Number 10, making butter and using every part of the milk. A family with a milk cow had fresh milk twice a day, far more than they could drink, so nothing about that milk got wasted. They skimmed the cream off the top and churned it into butter, working it and salting it by hand. What was left after churning didn't get poured out. That buttermilk went straight into the biscuits, the pancakes, and the buttermilk pie, giving them a tang you cannot fake. Extra milk was set to clabber and turned into soft cheese and cottage cheese. And even the thin whey left over from cheese making got fed to the hogs or used to soak the bread. One cow, milked by hand morning and evening, kept a whole family in butter, cheese, and baking, with not a drop going down the drain. The thick cream even went into the morning coffee, and the last clabbered bits the family didn't care for went straight out to the chickens, who turned it right back into eggs. Try pricing good cultured butter and farm cheese at the store today. These families made both from an animal that turned grass into groceries. Number 11, keeping bees and using the wax for everything. A hive or two behind the garden gave a Mennonite family more than honey, though the honey alone was worth it, sweetening the whole year without a sack of store sugar. The beeswax that came with it was almost as useful. Melted down, it made clean-burning candles for the long, dark evenings. Rubbed on wood, it polished the furniture and the butcher block. Worked into leather, it waterproofed the work boots and the harness. A little on the runners made a sticking drawer slide easy, and a coat of it sealed the jars and kept the hand tools from rusting. That same wax you'd pay a premium for now in a fancy candle or a tin of furniture balm came off their own hives for free, along with a full year of honey. A little of that wax, warmed with a spoon of honey and some tallow, made a salve for chapped hands and cracked lips, and a coat of it brushed over a wheel of cheese and sealed it up to age quietly in the cellar. 2 boxes of bees in the corner of the garden quietly paid for themselves several times over. Number 12, the spring house that chilled food with running water. Before the icebox and long before the refrigerator, a family lucky enough to have a cold spring built a little stone spring house right over it. The cold water bubbling up out of the ground ran through a shallow stone trough inside, and into that running water they set their crocks of milk, their butter, their cream, and their eggs. The steady cold of the spring, straight up out of the earth, kept everything fresh through the hottest days of summer, with no ice and no electricity required. Step inside a working spring house on a July afternoon and it hits you like walking into a cooler, that same damp chill running day and night for free. It's one of the smartest pieces of engineering these families ever built. And the only power bill was a spring that had been running since long before anybody thought to put a house on top of it. Number 13, harvesting winter ice to keep food cold in July. For families without a spring, the cold still had to be caught and kept, so they caught it in January. When the pond froze thick, the men went out with saws and cut the ice into great heavy blocks, hauled them up by sled, and packed them into an ice house buried in sawdust or straw. That sawdust was the whole trick. Packed tight around the blocks, it insulated them so well that ice cut in the dead of winter was still there, cold and solid, deep into the following summer. A chunk chipped off in July chilled the milk, set the butter, and froze the hand-cranked ice cream on a Sunday. They were storing winter itself and spending it slowly through the warm months. It took a hard day's work out on a frozen pond to fill that ice house, but once it was full, the family had refrigeration on the hottest day of the year with no wire running to it. Number 14, saving seed from the best of the garden. A Mennonite gardener didn't buy a new packet of seeds every spring. Come late summer, they walked the rows and picked out the best plants, the tomato that ripened biggest, the bean that produced longest, the squash that kept the best in the cellar, and they let those go all the way to seed. Those seeds got dried on a screen, labeled in a careful hand, and tucked into paper envelopes or glass jars for the winter. Year after year of choosing the strongest plants slowly bred a tomato or a bean that was perfectly suited to that exact patch of ground. And that exact climate, something no seed rack at the store could ever sell them. The garden paid for next year's garden right out of its own harvest. And when neighbors traded seeds over the fence, they were passing along varieties their own grandparents had been improving for generations. Number 15, quilting warmth out of worn-out clothes. When a shirt or a dress was finally too far gone to patch or hand down again, it still had one more life left in it. The good cloth got cut away from the worn spots and dropped into the scrap bag, and when that bag was full, it became a quilt. On winter evenings, the women and girls gathered around a big wooden quilting frame, and sometimes the whole neighborhood came for a quilting bee, a dozen pairs of hands stitching together in a single day what would take one. Every quilt was a kind of family history you could sleep under, a square from a father's Sunday shirt next to a square from a baby's first dress. Those quilts kept a family warm through unheated upstairs bedrooms on nights cold enough to freeze the water in the wash basin. A good one, made from cloth that cost nothing, gets handed down now as a treasure and sells for hundreds at auction. Nothing about it was bought. All of it was saved. If you're getting something out of this, take a second to subscribe. This channel is all about the old skills that still work, the ones worth keeping alive, and there's a lot more where this came from. Now let's get back to it, because the next one sat in almost every old kitchen, and hardly anybody today knows what it was even for. Number 16. Drying herbs and putting up simple home remedies. Long before there was a pharmacy in every town, a Mennonite family grew and dried its own little comfort chest right in the garden. Bunches of mint, chamomile, sage, and catnip hung drying from the kitchen rafters, filling the house with their smell. Come the first cold of winter, that dried mint and chamomile went into a pot of hot tea. Elderberries picked along the fence line got cooked down into a dark syrup and put up in jars. Honey from their own hives, a little horseradish, a warm onion poultice. These were the everyday comforts a mother reached for first, before anyone hitched up the buggy for the long ride to the doctor. None of it was fancy, and these folks were the first to send for the doctor when something was truly serious. But for the ordinary aches and sniffles of a long winter, a well-stocked shelf of dried herbs and honey handled a good deal of it at home, grown for the price of a few seeds and a sunny patch of dirt. Comfrey and plantain from the yard got simmered into a simple salve for scrapes and bug bites. Calendula went into another of it, and every jar of it sat labeled on the shelf right beside the canned peaches, ready for whatever the long winter happened to bring. Catching rainwater in a cistern. A Mennonite farmhouse was built to catch every drop that fell on it. The roof fed the gutters fed a downspout, and the downspout ran into a big underground cistern that held hundreds of gallons of soft rainwater. That rainwater was gold for washing. Naturally soft, with none of the minerals of hard well water, it lathered soap far better and left the clothes and the hair softer for it. A hand pump at the kitchen sink brought it up for the laundry, the dishes, the mopping, and the Saturday night baths. Every storm that rolled through topped the cistern back up for free, water that most houses today just let run off the roof and straight down the drain. It cost nothing but the gutters to collect it, and it saved the well and the mussel for the drinking water alone. Number 18. The treadle sewing machine that never needed a plug. In the corner of a plain front room sits a cast iron sewing machine set into a wooden table, run entirely by a foot pedal rocking back and forth. No cord, no motor, no electricity, just the steady rhythm of a foot and the whir of the wheel. On that treadle machine, a Mennonite woman made and mended the whole family's clothes, the shirts and dresses and trousers, the aprons and the bonnets, and turned bolts of plain cloth into a family's entire wardrobe. When the power goes out in a storm, that machine keeps right on sewing like nothing happened because it never depended on the power in the first place. Those old treadle machines are so well built that ones made over 100 years ago still sew a straight seam today, which is exactly why they get snapped up the second one shows up at a farm sale. Out here, they simply never needed to replace the ones they've got. Number 9, old newspaper and cloth put to a dozen uses. Nothing that came into a plain house left as garbage if it still had a use in it. Yesterday's newspaper started the fire in the cook stove, washed the windows to a streak-free shine, and wrapped up the kitchen scraps. It ripened the green tomatoes on the sill and got stuffed into wet boots overnight to dry them out and hold their shape. Worn-out clothing that was too far gone, even for the quilt bag, got torn into rags. And those rags cleaned, dusted, polished, and wiped up every mess in the house before they were finally used to start the next fire. There was a whole order to it: a clean rag for the dishes, a rougher one for the floor, the worst of them saved for the barn. And the very worst scraps, too ragged even to wipe a floor, still weren't finished because a woman could tear them into strips, braid the strips together, and coil the braid into a sturdy rag rug for the kitchen door, warm underfoot and made entirely of things that were an hour away from the fire. A family like this simply didn't generate the fat bag of trash a modern household sets out at the curb every single week, because almost nothing they brought in was single use to begin with. Number 20. Cleaning the whole house with 2 cheap staples. A Mennonite pantry didn't hold a cabinet full of spray bottles, each one promising to clean one single thing. It held baking soda and vinegar, and between the 2 of them, they cleaned just about everything. Baking soda scrubbed the pots, scoured the sink, took the smell out of the icebox, and freshened the rugs before they were swept up. Vinegar cut the grease, shined the windows, softened the wash, and dissolved the hard water crust off the tea kettle. Together, they could clear a slow drain with a satisfying fizz. 2 plain, cheap boxes and bottles did the work of a whole shelf of specialty cleaners, with nothing harsh in them that a child or a barn cat couldn't be around. Cleaning folks today are quietly going back to this exact pair and paying good money for it under the name natural cleaning, when it was really just the plain, cheap way these families always kept a house. Number 21. Darning socks instead of tossing them. A hole in the heel of a sock was not the end of that sock, not by a long shot. A Mennonite mother kept a darning egg, a smooth wooden egg on a handle, and she slipped it inside the sock to hold the shape, while she wove new thread back and forth across the hole, over and under, until it was closed up as good as new. She sat and did it of an evening, a whole basket of socks and worn elbows and split seams working through her hands while the family talked around the lamp. A pair of good wool socks got darned and darned again until, as the old joke went, there was more darning than original sock left. Buying a fresh pack of socks the minute one got a hole would have struck her as pure foolishness. That sock had years of wear left in it, and all it cost to get them was a needle, some yarn, and a quiet half hour by the light. Number 22. Heads your cod, pad your gaps. Feeding the garden with kitchen scraps. In a plain kitchen, the peelings and the coffee grounds and the eggshells never saw a trash can because all of it went right back into growing next year's food. Used coffee grounds got worked into the soil around the tomatoes and the roses, feeding them and keeping them happy. Crushed eggshells scattered around the plants added back what the soil was missing and helped keep the slugs off the young lettuce. Everything else, the peels and the trimmings and the spoiled bits, went onto the compost pile out back, breaking down all year into black, crumbly dirt that got dug right back into the garden come spring. Wood ashes from the cook stove got sprinkled, sweetening the soil for the beans and the cabbages, and the soiled straw mucked out of the chicken coop went right onto the pile to rot down with the rest. The garden fed the family, and the family fed the garden right back, around and around, with the store cut clean out of the loop. Gardeners today pay real money for bagged compost and organic fertilizer. These families made better, out of the very things most people bag up and set at the curb. Number 23, making brooms and tools by hand. A lot of what a Plain family used around the house, they made themselves out of what grew on the place. Brooms came from broomcorn grown right in the garden, the tall stalks cut, dried, and bound tight around a handle whittled from a straight branch. Handles for the hoes and the axes were shaved down from good hardwood. Baskets were woven from split oak and willow. When a wooden bucket or a chair or a barn door needed mending, a man walked out to his own workshop and fixed it with hand tools. A plane, a draw knife, a brace and bit, no trip to the hardware store required. A dull blade got its edge back on a foot-powered grindstone spinning against the back wall of the shop, so even keeping the tools sharp cost nothing but a little sweat. Knowing how to make and mend your own tools meant you were never left standing around waiting on a store to open when something broke. What broke, they repaired, and what they needed, more often than not, they could make themselves. Number 24, getting big jobs done with a work frolic. This is the one the rest of the world really did forget. When a Mennonite family had a job too big for one household, a new barn to raise, and a whole harvest to bring in ahead of the rain, a house to rebuild after a fire, and they didn't hire a crew or take out a loan. The whole community showed up. Dozens of neighbors arrived at dawn, the men framing and raising the barn, the women cooking to feed the entire crowd, the children carrying water and running tools, and by sundown a barn stood where that morning there was nothing but a foundation. They called these gatherings frolics, and no money ever changed hands, because everyone knew that when their own big day came, it was the kind of help you can't buy and don't have to, and it's the reason a Plain community can lose a barn to a fire on Monday and be milking in a brand new one by the end of the week. The button jar that fixed 1,000 small problems. In just about every Plain home, somewhere in the sewing basket, there's a jar full of buttons. Every time a shirt or a coat wore out past saving, before the cloth ever went to the rag bag, the buttons got snipped off and dropped into that jar, along with the good hooks, the snaps, and the zippers worth keeping. Years of it built up into a jar holding every button you could imagine, every size and color and kind. So when a button popped off a Sunday coat an hour before church, nobody ran to a store. Somebody just went to the jar and found one close enough to swap the whole set to match. Children learned to sew, sorting through that jar and stringing the buttons on a thread to count them. It's the smallest thing on this whole list, a jar of buttons somebody's grandmother started decades ago. But it's the very same idea behind every single hack we've talked about today. You keep what still has a use in it, you make what you can, you lean on the people right next to you. And you find you need the store a whole lot less than the world keeps telling you that you do. That jar of buttons is a whole way of life you can hold in your two hands, and out past the last paved road, they're still living it every single day. If you want to see how a Plain family feeds itself straight through a hard winter without a single trip to the grocery store, that's the one to watch next.